At her wedding, her in-laws mocked her
You
mother
never
in front
wanted
of
this for us.
500
No, I
guests.
do not.
But what she whispered
Please, not here.
made them run away. A great and beautiful story for my beautiful family. Hi, my beautiful family. May the Almighty surround you with His endless mercy, filling your homes with peace, your hearts with unshakable love, and your days with joy so pure it becomes your strength. May every wound turn into healing, every struggle into growth, and may your families always remain united under His light. My family, life is short and fragile. Speak kindly, forgive quickly, and love deeply. Respect your partner, guide your children with care, and never let anger steal the happiness of your home. True wealth is not money. It is the love and harmony we share with those closest to us. Every story I tell is written with my heart for you. Please honor me by watching till the end, because your trust is what keeps this family alive and strong. If your heart is true, right, present, if your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. Destiny doesn't knock politely. It kicks down your door wearing navy silk and a smile that could resurrect angels. And John Legend was about to discover that some collisions reshape your entire universe in the space of a single heartbeat. The Metropolitan Charity Gala sparkled with Manhattan's most elite. Crystal chandeliers casting diamonds across marble floors, where New York's untouchable moved like beautiful ghosts through conversations worth more than small countries. John Legend stood among them, his perfectly tailored tuxedo marking him as one of their own. But his dark eyes held the restless hunger of a man searching for something that couldn't be purchased with platinum cards or inherited through bloodlines. At 32, he possessed everything society deemed valuable, a fortune that could buy small nations, looks that graced magazine covers, charm that opened any door in the city. Yet standing in this ballroom, surrounded by people who'd known him since boarding school, John felt more alone than he had in his coldest childhood moments. "Another evening among the beautiful people," Thomas whispered beside him. John's oldest friend and business partner, adjusting his bow tie with practiced resignation. "At least the champagne is decent," John replied automatically, lifting his crystal flute toward another toast to another charity that would receive another substantial check from the Legend Foundation. Then she appeared in the arched doorway, and time didn't just stop, it shattered into a million glittering pieces. Liliana Jade entered like poetry given human form, her navy dress flowing around curves that made his mouth go dry, her dark hair catching light like spun silk as she moved with unconscious grace through the crowd. But it was her eyes that destroyed him, warm brown depths that held genuine curiosity rather than calculated assessment. Scanning faces with the kind of open warmth that had been polished out of everyone else in this room years ago. Without conscious thought, he began moving toward her, abandoning Thomas mid-conversation and navigating through clusters of Manhattan's finest with single-minded determination. His champagne glass trembled in his grip as he approached, and for the first time in his adult life, John Legend felt genuinely nervous about talking to a woman. She stood before a painting on the far wall, studying it with focused attention that suggested actual interest rather than social performance. Up close, she was even more devastating, skin that glowed warm bronze under the chandelier light, lips naturally pink and curved in a gentle smile, features that were classically beautiful, but somehow also completely unique. "Beautiful work," he said when he reached her, his voice coming out rougher than intended. She turned, and the full impact of her beauty hit him like lightning, striking twice in the same place. Her face was heart-shaped perfection, but it was the intelligence and kindness in her eyes that made his knees weak. "Do you know the artist?" she asked, her voice like honey and smoke, carrying just the faintest trace of a Brooklyn accent that made her even more perfect. "Monet," John managed, then immediately felt stupid for stating the obvious. "I mean, yes, it's one of his water lily series. You work for the foundation." There was no calculation in her question, no attempt to assess his worth or position, something like that. He couldn't tell her about the family legacy yet. "I'm John, Liliana." She extended her hand, and when their fingers touched, electricity shot up his arm and straight to his heart. Her skin was soft and warm, and she didn't pull away immediately like society women did. They stood there holding hands longer than propriety allowed, neither willing to break the connection that hummed between them like a live wire. John felt his champagne glass slipping from his other hand, but he was too mesmerized by the way her thumb was unconsciously stroking across his knuckles to care about anything else. The crystal flute hit the marble floor with a spectacular crash that seemed to echo through the entire ballroom. Champagne splashed across his perfectly polished shoes and up onto his pants, creating a spectacular mess that drew stares from nearby guests. "Oh no!" Liliana's eyes widened with genuine concern rather than embarrassment, and she immediately reached into her small purse for tissues. "I distracted you. I'm so sorry." "You did distract me," he admitted honestly, watching in amazement as she knelt gracefully to help clean up the mess. "But I've never been so grateful for a distraction in my life." She looked up at him from where she crouched among crystal fragments, and her smile was so radiant it made his chest tight. "Most men would be mortified right now. I should be mortified. Instead, I'm wondering if you'll dance with me in champagne-soaked shoes." She laughed, a sound like silver bells that made his soul sing. "Especially in champagne-soaked shoes. It'll give us something to laugh about when we tell our grandchildren how we met." The words hung in the air between them, too honest, too hopeful, too much for a first conversation. John braced himself for her to make polite excuses and disappear, but instead, her breath caught audibly. "That's quite an assumption," she said quietly. "What makes you think there will be grandchildren?" "Dodgy, because I've been waiting my entire life to spill champagne on myself in front of the woman I'm going to marry." She should have laughed or thought he was crazy. Instead, her fingers tightened around his, as if she felt the same inexplicable certainty. "That's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me," she whispered. "Dance with me, Liliana." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Let me prove that some accidents are really destiny in disguise." She fit in his arms like she was made for them. Her hand rested on his shoulder with perfect trust, her body following his lead as if they'd been dancing together for years instead of minutes. They moved in slow, hypnotic circles while the rest of the ballroom faded into background noise. "Tell me something real," she said softly, her breath warm against his neck. "I've never believed in love at first sight until approximately 15 minutes ago." His voice was rough with honesty. "Tell me something real back. I came here tonight because I volunteer at the children's hospital. This gala benefits. I had no intention of talking to anyone, especially not someone who looks like he belongs on magazine covers." Her eyes met his, vulnerable and brave. "But you spilled champagne and looked at me like I hung the moon. And suddenly I remember what it feels like to breathe." They danced until other couples cleared the floor around them, neither caring about the attention they were drawing. John was drowning in the scent of her perfume and the way her body felt pressed against his, warm and soft and perfect. "I should go," she finally whispered, though she made no move to leave his arms. "Should is a terrible word," he replied. "What do you want to do?" "Dance until dawn. Talk until we know each other's deepest secrets. Let you kiss me under the stars. Then let's do all of that." He led her toward the French doors that opened onto the hotel's rooftop terrace, where Manhattan glittered below them like fallen constellations. The night air was soft with summer promises, and when he turned to face her in the moonlight, she was even more beautiful, silver light painting her skin like stardust. "Liliana," he said her name like a prayer, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. "I know this is crazy. I know we just met. But I feel like I've been looking for you my whole life." "Kiss me," she whispered, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. Kiss me before I lose my courage, and remember all the reasons this is impossible." Their lips met in the space between heartbeats, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as she melted against him. She tasted like champagne and dreams, like everything he'd been missing without knowing it. Her hands fisted in his jacket, holding him close as if she was afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "John," she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like music. "What is it, beautiful?" "I don't even know your last name." He smiled, brushing his thumb across her cheekbone. "Legend. John Legend." Her eyes widened with recognition and something that might have been fear. The Legend name was known throughout New York, synonymous with wealth and power and a social stratosphere she had never moved in. "It's just a name," he said gently, catching her hand before she could retreat. "It doesn't change what just happened between us." "Doesn't it?" Her voice was small and uncertain. "I'm a volunteer at a children's hospital, John. I teach art classes to sick kids for free. I live in Brooklyn with my mother and take the subway to work." At 28, she'd built a life around service and meaning rather than wealth and status. I'm a man who just found the woman of his dreams and doesn't give a damn about anything else." He pulled her close again. "Whatever your last name is, wherever you're from, however much or little money you have, none of that matters." "Jade," she said finally. "My last name is Jade. Liliana Jade." He tested the name on his tongue like fine wine. "It's perfect." They talked until the gala ended and other guests filtered out into the night, sharing stories and dreams while dancing to music that drifted through the glass doors. When the hotel staff finally appeared to close the terrace, John realized with shock that 3 hours had passed like 3 minutes. "I have to go," Liliana said reluctantly. "It's after midnight. Have dinner with me tomorrow," he said immediately, panic flaring at the thought of her disappearing. She gave him her address in Brooklyn, and he memorized it like the most important information he'd ever received. When she finally left, with promises to call and one more kiss that nearly made him forget his own name, John stood alone, feeling like he'd been struck by lightning. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Photographers got pictures of you and the mystery woman. They're asking questions." John looked down at the screen, then up at the stars that had witnessed the most important night of his life, and realized that everything was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Chapter 2. Secret Flames in Hidden Gardens. Love, John discovered, was both the most natural thing in the world and the most dangerous, especially when it bloomed in shadows, cast by family expectations and social boundaries that had never been crossed without consequences. 3 weeks after the charity gala, John Legend was living a double life that would have seemed impossible a month ago. By day, he was the composed heir to Legend Industries, attending board meetings with polished charm. By night, he became someone entirely different, a man drunk on stolen kisses and secret rendezvous with a woman who made him forget his own name. Their first official date at the little Italian restaurant in the village had been everything he'd hoped for. She'd been nervous at first, but by dessert she was stealing bites of his tiramisu and telling him about her students, with eyes that sparkled like stars. "There's this boy, Marcus," she'd said, her voice soft with affection. 7 years old, fighting leukemia, and he paints these incredible dragons. He calls them guardian dragons, protecting all the kids in the hospital." John had reached across the table to capture her fingers. "Smart kid. What did you tell him when he asked about your prince?" And that maybe he was right. She'd looked up at him with such hope and vulnerability that he'd nearly pulled her across the table to kiss her senseless. Now, 3 weeks later, they'd fallen into a pattern of secret meetings that felt both thrilling and necessary. Brooklyn coffee shops where nobody knew his name, walks through Prospect Park with their fingers intertwined, quiet evenings in her tiny apartment that felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. Her apartment was a revelation, cramped but filled with light. Every surface covered with her students' artwork and photographs of her with her mother Paisley. Books stacked on tables, plants growing in coffee cups, a life built on love rather than money. "This is where I grew up," she told him on his first visit, showing him around with shy pride. Mom worked 3 jobs to keep it after Dad left. But she always said home wasn't about square footage. It was about heart, space. He'd kissed her then against the kitchen counter and whispered that he'd never felt more at home, anywhere. The letters had started the second week. Unable to express everything he felt in person, John had begun writing, pouring his heart onto cream-colored paper with midnight blue ink, sending couriers to deliver pieces of his soul 3 times a week. His phone rang while Liliana was rereading that morning's letter, and John's voice made her heart skip like always. "Emergency," he said without preamble. "My mother knows about us. She's had you investigated. I just found the file on her desk." Liliana's blood turned to ice. "What kind of investigation?" "Everything. Your background, Paisley's work history, your apartment, your finances. She thinks having ammunition about your circumstances will make me see reason." His voice was tight with fury. "I'm sorry, Lily. The invasion of your privacy is unforgivable." "What did she find?" "Nothing shameful, because there's nothing shameful about your family. But she'll try to use your mother's struggles, your modest background, your lack of social connections as weapons." John's voice gentled. "Listen carefully. Nothing she discovered changes how I feel. If anything, learning about your strength only makes me love you more." That evening they met at their usual spot, but tension crackled between them like electricity before a storm. John had dark circles under his eyes and kept running his hands through his hair. "She wants to meet with you," he said without preamble. "Lunch tomorrow at the plaza. She called it getting to know my son's friend. But we both know what it really is. An interrogation designed to make me feel inadequate and unworthy." Liliana's voice was steady, despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Don't go. We'll face this together as a united front." "No!" The word surprised them both with its firmness. "I need to do this. If I'm going to be part of your life, I have to prove I can handle your mother's disapproval without you protecting me." John reached across the table, capturing her hands with desperate intensity. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're perfect exactly as you are." The plaza lunch was everything Liliana had expected and worse. Athena Legend was beautiful and cold and surgically precise in her cruelty, asking questions designed to highlight every difference between their backgrounds. "You must understand, dear," Athena said over champagne, "that being a legend wife requires certain skills, social connections, cultural knowledge, the ability to navigate complex situations. It's not enough to be pretty and sweet." "I understand perfectly," Liliana replied steadily. "You're worried I'll embarrass your son and damage the family reputation." Athena's smile was sharp as winter. "I'm worried you'll break his heart when you realize you can't handle the pressure of his world. Better to end this before real damage is done." But Liliana surprised them both by standing, her dignity intact despite the verbal assault. "Mrs. Legend, I love your son with everything I am. That love makes me want to be worthy of him, not change him to fit some predetermined mold. If you can't see the difference, that's your limitation, not mine." She left Athena sitting alone, but as she walked away, she could feel ice-blue eyes boring into her back like daggers. That evening, John found her crying in her apartment, and when she told him about the lunch, his face went dark with rage that made her shiver. "She's declared war on us," he said quietly, "but she's about to learn that I fight harder for love than she fights for control." The next morning brought newspaper headlines that made their private battle very public. Legends love, fairy tale or social climbing. The photograph showed them leaving her building, hands intertwined, both looking like people who'd found something worth fighting for. John's phone had been ringing all morning. Reporters, business associates, society columnists, all wanting statements about his relationship with the mystery woman from Brooklyn. But the call that mattered came from his father. "Son," David Legend's voice was warm with genuine affection. "I saw the papers this morning. When do I get to meet the woman who's made you happier than I've seen you since you were 8 years old?" That afternoon, they sat in David's study while John's father asked thoughtful questions about Liliana's work and seemed genuinely interested in her students and their art. The difference between his warmth and Athena's coldness was so stark it made Liliana's chest ache with gratitude. "She sounds remarkable," David said finally. "I can see why you fell in love with her. When can we arrange a proper family dinner?" The family dinner, when it came 2 weeks later, was a disaster orchestrated with surgical precision. Athena had invited the Blackwoods and Sterlings, old family friends whose daughter, Victoria, had been throwing herself at John for years and turned what should have been a welcoming meal into an interrogation designed to make Liliana feel like an outsider. "How philanthropic," Victoria said with poisonous sweetness when Liliana mentioned her hospital work. "Working with those kinds of children. I'm sure they're very grateful for any attention." The implication was unmistakable, and John's protective fury was immediate and absolute. "Those children have more genuine character than most adults in this room," he said coldly. "And Liliana has more class in her little finger than—" "John," his mother interrupted smoothly, "perhaps we could discuss something more pleasant." But the damage was done. The evening continued with carefully placed barbs and calculated insults, each one designed to highlight how different Liliana was from the women they expected John to marry. By dessert, the tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. On the drive back to Brooklyn, John was vibrating with barely controlled rage. "I'm sorry," he said for the 10th time. "My mother orchestrated that entire evening to make you feel unwelcome. She succeeded," Liliana admitted quietly. "But she also showed me exactly what we're up against. This isn't going to get easier, John. Your family isn't going to suddenly accept me." "Then my family can go to hell," John said fiercely. "You're my choice, Lily. You're my future. If they can't see how lucky I am to have found you, that's their loss." 3 weeks later, when John proposed during a thunderstorm at his lake house with his grandmother's emerald ring and tears streaming down his face, when Liliana said yes through happy sobs and kisses that tasted like forever, they both knew they were choosing love over everything else. The engagement announcement in the Times was beautiful, but it also marked the beginning of a war that would test every aspect of their relationship. Athena Legend had lost the first battle, but she was already planning strategies that would make their previous conflicts look like gentle disagreements. Love had won the opening skirmish, but the real war was just beginning, and neither side was prepared for how brutal it was about to become. Chapter 3. Love, Letters, and Heartbeats. Some words are meant to be whispered in darkness. Others shouted from rooftops. But the most dangerous ones are those written in midnight ink by trembling hands and sent like prayers to hearts that might not survive their honesty. The handwritten letter arrived during Liliana's lunch break, delivered by a courier who vanished as quickly as he'd appeared, and when she saw John's elegant script across cream paper, her pulse quickened with anticipation that had become as regular as breathing over the past 2 months. 8 weeks had passed since the charity gala that changed everything. 8 weeks of stolen moments and secret meetings that felt simultaneously like a lifetime and like no time at all. The newspaper attention following their engagement announcement had made their relationship feel more real and more fragile, turning them from 2 people falling in love into John Legend's fiancée and the woman who'd captured New York's most eligible bachelor. But the letters had become their sanctuary. Intimate communications that arrived 3 times weekly, like clockwork, each one revealing deeper layers of the man she was falling desperately in love with. Today's felt different, though, heavier, more urgent, written in ink that seemed to bleed emotion across expensive paper. "My beloved Liliana," it began, and she could hear his voice speaking each word, could picture him in his office overlooking Manhattan, while pouring his heart onto paper with fountain pen that matched his eyes. "I write this knowing it might be the most important letter I ever send, because I can no longer pretend that what we share is anything less than the kind of love that reshapes entire lives. Last night I lay awake thinking about the way you laugh when something surprises you. That gorgeous sound that starts low in your throat and bubbles up until your whole face transforms with joy. There are darker things we need to discuss, my love, and I'm a coward for putting them in a letter instead of saying them to your beautiful face. My mother's investigation was just the beginning. She's planning something bigger. I can see it in her eyes. The cold calculation that appears when she views someone as an obstacle to remove rather than a person to understand. Don't let her poison what we've built together, Liliana. Don't let anyone make you feel small or temporary or unworthy. You are permanent in my heart, written in ink that can never be erased, carved into my soul with letters that spell forever. I love you beyond reason, beyond logic, beyond anything I thought possible. Meet me tonight at our place in the village. I need to hold you to remind us both that what we have is stronger than any force trying to tear us apart. Forever yours, in this life and whatever comes after, John." Her phone buzzed immediately with a text from Isabella. "Whatever you just read made you glow like Christmas morning. Please tell me it's another love letter from Prince Charming." Isabella Martinez had been her anchor through every crisis since college. The only person besides Paisley who understood that this wasn't just infatuation with wealth and status. "He's worried about his mother's next move," Liliana typed back. Her phone rang within seconds. "What's the Ice Queen planning now?" "I don't know, but John says she's not done trying to break us up. The investigation, the hostile family dinners, the society friends who make cutting remarks. Apparently that was all just the opening act." "Honey, you survived Victoria Blackwood's best attempts at intimidation. You can handle whatever Athena throws at you next." Isabella's voice was fierce with protective loyalty. "Besides, John is completely crazy about you. I've seen the way he looks at you, like you hung the moon and painted the stars just for him." That evening, Liliana found John waiting at their usual table in the village restaurant. But something was different about his energy. He was wound tighter than she'd ever seen him, his usual calm confidence replaced by an almost frantic need to touch her, hold her, reassure himself that she was real and there and his. "Hey," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from him. "Talk to me. What's got you so scared?" "I'm not scared," he said automatically, then caught himself. "That's a lie. I'm terrified. My mother cornered me at the office today with a folder full of photographs and documents, claiming she had information that would help me see clearly about our relationship." "What kind of information?" "I didn't look at it." John's voice was fierce with protective determination. "I told her that nothing she'd found could possibly change how I feel about you, and that if she ever tried to ambush you with whatever poison she'd compiled, she'd lose her son permanently." Liliana reached across the table to capture his hands, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles like wire about to snap. What did she say? It was that she was trying to protect me from making the biggest mistake of my life. That love makes people blind to reality, and reality is that we come from completely different worlds that will never successfully merge. John's jaw was tight with frustrated anger. She actually used the phrase temporary infatuation to describe what we have. "Maybe she's right about us being from different worlds," Liliana said quietly, and something in her tone made John's attention sharpen with alarm. "Lily, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe your mother sees things we're too caught up in each other to recognize. The past 2 months have been like living in a beautiful bubble, but eventually bubbles burst when they hit reality. Her voice was small and uncertain, in a way that made his chest tighten with fear. What reality? The reality that I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. The reality that you make me want to be better while accepting me exactly as I am. The reality that every day without you feels empty, and every day with you feels like a gift. The reality that I don't know which fork to use at formal dinners, that I shop at Target and take the subway, that I've never been to Europe or owned anything that wasn't on sale. Tears were threatening now, months of subtle pressure and constant judgment finally taking their toll. The reality that your friends look at me like I'm a charity case you're amusing yourself with. John was around the table and pulling her into his arms before she could take another breath, holding her tight against his chest while she fought back tears that had been building for weeks. "Listen to me," he said fiercely, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't give a damn about proper fork usage or designer labels or whether you've been to fucking Europe. I care that you cry during commercials about rescued animals. I care that you spend your free time teaching art to sick children. I care that you make grocery shopping feel like an adventure and Sunday morning pancakes taste like love." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You want to know what reality is? Reality is that you're the best person I've ever met. Reality is that my life was empty before you filled it with laughter and purpose and genuine connection. Reality is that I would rather live in a studio apartment in Brooklyn with you than in a mansion on the Upper East Side with anyone else. But your mother, my mother is scared of losing control over my life, so she's trying to make you doubt your place in it. But your place isn't something she gets to determine. It's not something anyone gets to determine except you and me." They made love that night with desperate tenderness, as if they were trying to memorize each other in case external forces succeeded in tearing them apart. John whispered promises against her skin while she held him like he might disappear. And when they finally fell asleep, tangled together, both were more determined than ever to fight for what they'd found. The next morning brought a delivery that changed everything. Not one of John's usual love letters, but a thick manila envelope addressed to Liliana in Athena's precise handwriting. Inside were photographs, financial records, and a typed note that made Liliana's blood run cold. "Since my son refuses to look at the truth about your family, perhaps you'll be more reasonable. These documents show exactly what kind of people the legends are allying themselves with. I trust you'll make the appropriate decision about your future." The papers detailed every struggle her mother had endured, the multiple jobs, the government assistance, the subsidized housing, the times when choosing between rent and groceries had been an actual decision. But more than that, they revealed things Liliana hadn't known, things her mother had hidden to protect her, the night shifts cleaning office buildings after her day job, the weekends spent catering parties for people who treated her like furniture, the years when Paisley had gone without basic necessities so her daughter could have school supplies and art classes. By the time Liliana finished reading, she was crying not from shame about their circumstances, but from overwhelming love and gratitude for a mother who'd sacrificed everything without ever making her daughter feel like a burden. When John arrived at her apartment that evening, he found her sitting at the kitchen table with the documents spread around her like evidence in a trial. "She sent these to you," he said, and it wasn't a question. His voice was deadly quiet in a way that made the air feel dangerous. "She wanted me to see the truth about my family, the truth about why someone like me doesn't belong with someone like you." John picked up one of the photographs, a picture of Paisley leaving a late-night cleaning job, exhaustion written in every line of her body, and his face went white with rage that made Liliana take an involuntary step back. "This isn't truth," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. This is invasion of privacy used as psychological warfare. This is my mother trying to make you ashamed of a woman who deserves nothing but admiration and respect." He gathered the papers with careful precision, as if they might contaminate everything they touched. "Lily, look at me. Your mother is a hero. She worked multiple jobs to give you opportunities she never had. She sacrificed her own comfort to ensure you could pursue your dreams. There is nothing in these documents except evidence of love and strength and the kind of character that can't be bought or inherited. But my mother thinks that breeding matters more than behavior, that inherited money is somehow more valuable than earned happiness, that social connections are more important than genuine love." John's voice was absolute finality. "My mother is wrong about everything that matters." 3 weeks later, when society columnists began writing blind items about John Legend's mystery fiancé's questionable background, when invitations to certain parties stopped arriving, when whispers followed them through restaurants and galas, Liliana understood that Athena's campaign was just beginning, but she also understood something else. John's love wasn't conditional on her fitting into his world. It was strong enough to build them a new world entirely, one where the only currency that mattered was the honest affection between two people who'd chosen each other against all odds. The war for their future was escalating, but they were no longer fighting as individuals. They were fighting as partners, and that made them infinitely stronger than any enemy could possibly anticipate. Chapter 4. Meeting the Dragon. Hell, Liliana discovered, could be beautifully decorated and served on fine china, especially when it came disguised as Sunday dinner with future in-laws who viewed your existence as a personal insult to their bloodline and social standing. 4 months after the charity gala, where their worlds collided in champagne and starlight, Liliana found herself sitting in the Legend family estate's formal dining room, surrounded by portraits of ancestors who seemed to stare down at her with the same cold disapproval that radiated from Athena Legend like winter fog rolling off a frozen lake. The drive through the estate's iron gates had been intimidating enough. Winding driveways lined with ancient oaks, manicured lawns that stretched beyond the horizon. A house that looked more like a museum than a family home. But it was the silence that greeted their arrival that made Liliana's stomach clench with apprehension. "Remember what I told you," John had said as they approached the front entrance, his hand warm and steadying on her back. "My mother can be challenging, but she raised me to be polite to guests. You are my honored guest and my fiancé, which entitles you to respect regardless of her personal feelings." Now, 3 courses into what felt more like a trial than a meal, Liliana was learning that respect could be expressed in ways that felt indistinguishable from subtle torture. "The salmon is lovely," she said politely, trying to fill another silence that had stretched until it felt oppressive. "Cook does have a way with fish," Athena agreed, her tone suggesting that this was somehow relevant to larger questions about Liliana's suitability for the family. "I suppose you don't get much opportunity to prepare salmon in your current living situation." The emphasis on current was delicate but unmistakable, carrying the implication that Liliana's Brooklyn apartment was temporary accommodation until she either upgraded through marriage or downgraded through abandonment. David Legend, John's father, was doing his best to maintain civilized conversation. "Liliana, John tells me you teach art at an elementary school. That must be incredibly rewarding work." "It is," Liliana replied, grateful for his genuine interest. "Children have such natural creativity before the world teaches them to doubt themselves. My job is mostly just giving them permission to explore what they're already capable of." "How meaningful," Athena observed, making charity work sound like a hobby that adults eventually outgrew. "I'm sure it provides a nice sense of purpose while you're figuring out your actual career path." John's fork hit his plate with a sharp clink that made everyone look up. Teaching is her actual career path, Mother. Liliana has a master's degree in fine arts and has been recognized by the school district for her innovative programs helping children process trauma through creative expression. Of course, Athena replied smoothly, but her smile never reached her eyes. I simply meant that once you're married, priorities often shift. Family obligations, social responsibilities, the various commitments that come with the legend name. It becomes difficult to maintain. Outside interests. The phrase outside interests was delivered with surgical precision, designed to reduce Liliana's passion for teaching to something trivial that would naturally be discarded once she achieved her presumed goal of marrying into wealth. Actually, Liliana said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice, I can't imagine giving up teaching. Working with children who are facing serious challenges has taught me that creativity and hope are often the same thing. It's not just my job, it's who I am. Athena's eyebrows rose slightly, as if she found this devotion to working-class employment both quaint and concerning. How admirable. Though I suspect you'll find that being a legend wife provides quite enough opportunities for charitable involvement. We sit on several museum boards, organize fundraisers for worthy causes, support various cultural institutions. Very fulfilling work. The implication was clear. Proper charity work was organized from boardrooms and conducted at galas, not performed in elementary school classrooms, with children whose problems couldn't be solved with checkbook philanthropy. I'm sure those organizations do important work, Liliana replied carefully, but there's something special about direct service, about forming relationships with individual children and watching them discover their own strength through art. It's not something I could replace with board meetings and fundraising events. The silence that followed was loaded with implications nobody wanted to voice directly. Athena's disapproval was palpable, but she was too socially skilled to express it as anything other than polite concern about Liliana's naivety regarding her future responsibilities. Tell me about your mother, Athena said suddenly, changing tactics with the smooth precision of a chess master deploying a new strategy. She must be very proud of your achievements. Liliana's entire body tensed. John had warned her that his mother's investigation had uncovered details about their family background, but she hadn't expected those details to become dinner conversation weapons. My mother is amazing, Liliana said firmly. She raised me alone after my father left, worked multiple jobs to keep us afloat, and somehow still found time to encourage my artistic interests. Everything I've accomplished is built on the foundation of her sacrifices. How difficult that must have been, Athena said with what sounded like sympathy but felt like condescension. Single motherhood, financial struggles, trying to provide stability without adequate resources. Such challenges often leave lasting impacts on family dynamics. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly recognizing his wife's technique even if he didn't approve of it. John's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger, his knuckles white where he gripped his wine glass. The only lasting impact, Liliana said quietly but firmly, was learning that love and determination matter more than money or social status. My mother taught me that character isn't inherited. It's developed through the choices you make and the way you treat people who can't do anything for you in return. How philosophical, Athena replied, and somehow made wisdom sound like evidence of unsophistication, though I wonder if such idealistic perspectives hold up under the pressures of adult responsibilities. Marriage, for instance, requires practical considerations beyond romantic feelings. Such as? Liliana asked, though she suspected she didn't want to hear the answer. Compatibility of backgrounds, shared social circles, complementary life experiences. The ability to support each other's obligations and understand the complexities of prominent family dynamics. Athena's voice was gentle, but relentless. Love is wonderful, dear, but it's not always enough to bridge significant differences in upbringing and expectations. The words were delivered like a diagnosis from a doctor explaining terminal illness to a patient who hadn't yet grasped the severity of their condition. Athena wasn't being cruel. She was being practical, explaining reality to someone too inexperienced to understand it independently. John's control finally snapped. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone at the table freeze. "Mother, you're being incredibly rude to my fiancé, and I won't tolerate it another moment. I'm simply trying to have an honest conversation about important considerations. You're trying to make Liliana feel unwelcome and inferior, using polite language to disguise what amounts to character assassination." John's voice was deadly calm. "You've questioned her career, dismissed her values, and implied that she lacks the sophistication necessary for our family. That's not honest conversation. That's calculated cruelty." Athena's mask of polite concern finally slipped, revealing something colder and more desperate underneath. "I'm trying to protect you from making a mistake that will affect the rest of your life. You're infatuated with someone whose background and experiences are completely incompatible with your responsibilities and future." "My future is whatever I choose to make it," John replied, standing from his chair with the kind of decisive movement that indicated the conversation was over. "And I choose to make it with Liliana, who has more genuine class and authentic character than anyone else in this room." He moved to stand behind Liliana's chair, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders in a gesture of unmistakable support and protection. "We're leaving now. When you're ready to treat my fiancée with the respect she deserves, you can call me to arrange another visit." The drive back to Brooklyn was quiet, except for John's occasional muttered curses about his mother's behavior and his repeated apologies for subjecting Liliana to such treatment. But Liliana was lost in thought, processing not just what had been said, but what it revealed about the battle they were fighting. "She's not evil," she said finally, as they crossed the bridge into Brooklyn. "She's scared." John looked at her with surprise and something that might have been admiration. "After what she put you through tonight, you're defending her?" "I'm not defending her behavior, but I think I understand it." Liliana stared out the window at her neighborhood. Modest apartment buildings, corner bodegas, kids playing basketball under streetlights. She spent 30 years planning your life, imagining your future, protecting what she sees as your best interests. And then I appeared out of nowhere, representing everything she never planned for. That doesn't excuse cruelty disguised as concern. "No, it doesn't, but it explains it." Liliana turned to look at him, seeing the man she'd fallen in love with beneath the anger and frustration. "Your mother isn't fighting me, John. She's fighting the loss of control over your future. The question is whether we're going to let that fear turn us into enemies, or whether we're going to find a way to help her see that love doesn't diminish a family, it expands it." John pulled the car over and kissed her with desperate gratitude, tasting the strength and wisdom that made her so different from anyone else he'd ever known. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "Not despite where you come from, but because of who you are. My mother will learn to see that, or she'll lose her son trying to control him." 3 weeks later, when the society pages began running blind items about John Legend's unsuitable engagement and invitations to certain parties stopped arriving, they understood that Athena's dinner had been reconnaissance for a larger war. But they also understood something else. They were stronger together than any force trying to tear them apart, and that strength would have to be enough to survive whatever battles lay ahead. Chapter 5. The Proposal of Forever. Some moments arrive wearing storm clouds and lightning, but the most life-changing ones sneak up wearing ordinary clothes and find you when you're least prepared to have your entire world shifted off its axis by 3 small words and a ring that carries the weight of generations. The October rain hammered against the windows of John's lake house like bullets from heaven, and somewhere between the lightning that split the sky and the champagne that sparkled in crystal glasses, Liliana Jade was about to receive a proposal that would change everything she thought she knew about fairy tales coming true despite impossible odds. 5 months had passed since that first electrifying night at the charity gala. 5 months of stolen kisses and secret letters, of Sunday dinners with David's warmth battling against Athena's ice, of building a love so fierce and true that it made them both believe in forever, even when forever seemed impossible to achieve. "I can't believe we got caught in this," Liliana laughed, toweling rainwater from her hair while John built a fire in the massive stone fireplace that dominated the living room. They'd planned a simple evening walk along the lakeshore, a quiet dinner for two, maybe some dancing under the stars. Instead, they'd been trapped by a sudden squall that turned the lake into a cauldron and sent them running for shelter like children caught in summer storms. "I planned it this way," John said with mock seriousness, though his hands shook slightly as he arranged kindling with unusual care. "I have connections with the weather service. Called in some favors." "You're ridiculous." She moved to stand behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her cheek against the warm cotton of his shirt. "But I love being trapped here with you. It feels like the rest of the world has disappeared and we're the only two people left on Earth." John's hands covered hers where they rested against his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat racing beneath her palms. Something was different about him tonight. He'd been nervous during dinner, distracted in a way that wasn't like him, fumbling with words he usually delivered with smooth confidence. "Liliana," he said quietly, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't identify, "there's something I need to tell you." The serious tone made her step back so she could see his face, and what she found there made her breath catch. His dark eyes were bright with unshed tears, his jaw tight with barely controlled emotion, his whole body vibrating with nervous energy that seemed to fill the entire room. "You're scaring me," she whispered. "Is everything okay? Is your family?" "My family is fine. Better than fine, actually. My father adores you, which you already know." John ran a hand through his hair, leaving it disheveled in a way that made him look younger and more vulnerable. "This isn't about them. This is about us. About something I should have done weeks ago, but kept chickening out because the timing never felt right." Understanding began to dawn in Liliana's chest like sunrise, warm and golden and terrifying in its implications. Her hand moved unconsciously to her throat, fingers finding the pulse point that had suddenly begun hammering like hummingbird wings. John turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his with a grip that was almost desperate in its intensity. "I had this whole elaborate plan. Dinner at Daniel, champagne on the terrace of the Rainbow Room, a string quartet playing your favorite song while I got down on one knee with half of Manhattan as witnesses. I wanted it to be perfect and public and exactly what every little girl dreams about. But..." Her voice was barely a whisper, afraid to hope and afraid not to hope in equal measure. "But then this storm hit, and we're here alone with just the fire and the rain and each other, and I realized this is perfect. This is us, real and unscripted and beautiful in its simplicity." He looked into her eyes with the kind of intensity that made the rest of the world disappear. "I don't need an audience or a fancy restaurant or a perfectly choreographed moment. I just need you." Lightning illuminated the room in stark black and white, and in that moment of supernatural clarity, Liliana saw John Legend the way she'd never seen him before, not as the wealthy heir to a business empire or New York's most eligible bachelor, but as someone achingly human and vulnerable, standing on the edge of his own cliff and preparing to jump without knowing if anyone would catch him. "I love you," he said, and the words came out cracked and desperate and more honest than any declaration she'd ever heard. "I love you beyond reason and beyond logic and beyond anything I thought my heart was capable of holding. I love your laugh and your terrible puns and the way you cry during commercials for dog food." Tears were streaming down Liliana's face now, But she made no move to wipe them away, afraid that any movement might break the spell John was weaving with nothing but raw truth and desperate hope. I love how fierce you get when someone criticizes your students, and how gentle you are when you're teaching them to see beauty in broken things. I love that you see me as John, not as a legend. I love that you make grocery shopping feel like an adventure and Sunday mornings feel like sacraments. The fire crackled behind him, casting dancing shadows across his face as he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that seemed to glow with promise in the firelight. "This ring belonged to my grandmother," he said, his voice breaking on the words, "the only person in my family who ever told me that love was more important than money or status or approval from people who don't matter. She wore it for 63 years of marriage to a man who loved her completely and imperfectly and eternally." He dropped to one knee on the hardwood floor, and the sound seemed to echo through the room like a gunshot. When he opened the box, the emerald ring inside caught the firelight and threw it back in green and gold sparks that looked like captured stars. "Before she died, she made me promise to give it only to someone who would love me the same way." His voice was steady now, filled with absolute certainty. "Liliana Jade, you are my grandmother's prayer answered, my heart's deepest longing fulfilled, my soul's perfect match. You are everything I didn't know I was looking for, and everything I'm terrified of losing." The storm outside seemed to pause, as if even nature was holding its breath for her answer. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the distant rumble of thunder, and John's breathing as he waited for her to speak. "Marry me, beautiful girl," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Be my wife and my partner and my best friend. Help me build a life that's worthy of the love we've found together." Liliana looked down at this incredible man kneeling before her, offering her not just a ring, but his whole heart, his whole future, his whole life. She thought about the letters he wrote that made her cry happy tears, about the way he held doors and treated everyone with respectful courtesy, about his laugh and his kindness, and the way he kissed her like she was the most precious thing in his world. She thought about the obstacles they'd face, his mother's disapproval, society's whispers, the constant scrutiny that came with loving someone whose life was public property. She thought about investigation files and surprise dinner parties designed to make her feel small, about Victoria Blackwood's cutting remarks and Helena's condescending smiles. Then she thought about the way John had stood up for her that night, the fierce pride in his voice when he'd called her his future wife, the absolute certainty in his eyes when he'd told her she was worth fighting for. Most of all, she thought about love, not the fairy tale kind that existed in movies, but the real kind that chose to be brave in the face of uncertainty, that fought for what mattered even when the odds were against it. "Yes," she whispered, then louder as joy overwhelmed her fears. "Yes, John Legend, I'll marry you. I'll marry you today or tomorrow or whenever you want, because I love you too much to imagine spending my life with anyone else." The relief that flooded John's face was so complete and overwhelming that it took her breath away. His hands shook as he slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit so perfectly it might have been made for her specifically, the emerald catching the light and seeming to pulse with its own inner fire. "It's perfect," she breathed, holding her hand up to admire the way the antique setting looked against her skin. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," John said roughly, surging to his feet and pulling her into his arms for a kiss that tasted like promises and champagne and forever. They made love that night with desperate tenderness, both sensing that something fundamental had changed between them. John whispered her name like a prayer against her skin while she held him close and memorized the feeling of being completely, perfectly loved. When morning came with sunshine streaming through windows and the peaceful lapping of lake water against the shore, They woke tangled together and grinning like teenagers who discovered the secret to happiness. "When?" John asked, playing with her ring while she traced patterns on his bare chest. "How soon can we do this? Because now that you've said yes, I don't want to wait another day to make you my wife." 6 months, Liliana said after considering. "Enough time to plan something beautiful, but not so long that your mother has time to talk us out of it." "My mother could have 6 years and she wouldn't talk me out of loving you," John said fiercely. "But 6 months sounds perfect. Just long enough to give my father time to plan the speech he's been writing in his head since he met you." They called their families from the lake house, sharing the news with voices still rough with emotion and faces that glowed with happiness. David's whoop of joy was so loud they had to hold the phone away from their ears, while Paisley cried happy tears and asked to speak to John privately, so she could welcome him to the family and threaten him with bodily harm if he ever hurt her daughter. The only call they didn't make was to Athena Legend, who would find out about their engagement the same way everyone else did, through the announcement they planned to put in the Times the following week. By the time they returned to the city, everything felt different. They weren't just John and Liliana anymore. They were an engaged couple, partners in building a future that would either prove love could conquer anything or demonstrate that some obstacles were too large for even the strongest hearts to overcome. The ring on Liliana's finger caught sunlight like captured fire, a constant reminder that someone loved her enough to fight for her, to choose her over ease and convenience and family approval. But as they drove through the gates of the Legend estate that evening to share their news with David in person, neither of them noticed Athena watching from an upstairs window with the kind of cold calculation that suggested the real war was just beginning. Chapter 6. Engagement Under Siege. War. Athena Legend had learned over 3 decades of Manhattan society battles, was most effectively waged not with armies and artillery, but with carefully placed whispers, strategically timed revelations, and the kind of social destruction that left no visible wounds, while ensuring the target never recovered from the damage. 7 months after the charity gala, where their worlds first collided, 2 months after the engagement announcement that had shaken New York's social hierarchy, Athena Legend sat in her private study, surrounded by the weapons she'd been gathering: photographs, financial records, witness statements, and testimony from people who remembered things others would prefer to forget. The private investigator's second report lay open on her mahogany desk, much thicker than the first, and infinitely more damaging. The engagement announcement in the Times had been beautiful, a stunning photograph of John and Liliana laughing over coffee, her ring catching sunlight like a small star, both radiating the kind of happiness that made even cynical observers believe in love. The accompanying text had been perfectly crafted, mentioning her work with children and their plans for a spring wedding without dwelling on the social chasm between their backgrounds. But Athena knew that beauty was often a mask for ugliness, and happiness was frequently built on foundations that couldn't withstand serious scrutiny. Her investigation had uncovered enough ammunition to shatter even the strongest fairy tale, and she was finally ready to deploy it. The wedding preparations had provided perfect cover for her escalating campaign. Every venue meeting became an opportunity to highlight Liliana's inexperience with events of this magnitude. Every vendor consultation revealed new ways to emphasize the gap between their worlds. Each dress fitting allowed for gentle suggestions about what was appropriate for someone marrying into the Legend family. The ivory with silver accents is more traditional, she'd suggested during the most recent visit to Kleinfeld, watching Liliana's confidence visibly shrink as yet another preference was questioned. The cream with gold foil is perhaps a bit flashy for a Legend bride. At 28, Liliana had never experienced this kind of systematic psychological warfare, but she was learning quickly that love required not just passion, but strategy, not just commitment, but the wisdom to choose battles worth fighting. But subtlety wasn't working fast enough. The wedding was 4 months away. Invitations would go out soon, and once that happened, backing out would become infinitely more complicated. Social humiliation aside, the business implications of a broken engagement this close to the event would be severe. Her phone buzzed with a text from Helena Blackwood. "Coffee tomorrow. I have information about your situation that might interest you." Helena had been conducting her own investigation, motivated by Victoria's humiliation and genuine belief that John was making a terrible mistake. Between them, they'd uncovered enough ammunition to end this charade once and for all. The next morning found them seated in a quiet corner of the Four Seasons restaurant. Two perfectly groomed women who'd spent decades navigating Manhattan's treacherous social waters and knew exactly how to destroy someone without getting their own hands dirty. "I've found something," Helena said without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the pristine white tablecloth. "About the mother's past. Things that apparently never made it into the official records." Athena opened the folder with careful attention, and what she found inside made her breath catch with satisfied surprise. Photographs, hospital records, police reports from 29 years ago, a complete picture of circumstances that would horrify John if he knew the full truth. "Where did you find this?" she asked, though she was already calculating how to deploy the information for maximum impact. "Private investigator who specializes in cold cases. Expensive but thorough. The question is what you plan to do with it." Athena studied the documents, evidence of secrets that had been buried for nearly 3 decades, mistakes that had shaped an entire life, choices that would destroy any romantic illusions about noble poverty and virtuous struggle. "I'm going to give my son the information he needs to make an informed decision about his future," she said carefully, though she had no intention of simply presenting facts and allowing John to choose. This ammunition was too valuable to waste on rational conversation. The engagement party 2 weeks later provided the perfect opportunity. Held at the Legend estate, it was everything Athena could have orchestrated to highlight the differences between the families. 300 guests in evening wear, champagne worth more than most annual salaries, flowers flown in from different countries to create arrangements that belonged in museums. Liliana looked beautiful but overwhelmed in a designer gown that Athena had selected after rejecting her first choice as inappropriate for the occasion. She moved through the crowd with visible discomfort, clearly out of her element among people who'd known each other since childhood. Paisley Jade, wearing what was obviously her one good dress, stood near the champagne fountain, accepting congratulations with the quiet dignity that her 52 years had taught her to maintain under any circumstances, even when facing social predators who viewed her presence as an invasion. But tonight, knowing what she knew about the woman's past, that dignity looked more like desperate performance. The moment came during the toasts, when the crowd had gathered on the terrace under lights that cost more than most people's monthly rent. John stood with his arm around Liliana's waist, both glowing with happiness that would have been touching if it weren't so misguided. But before David could begin his planned speech, Athena smoothly intercepted the moment with practiced grace, the folder containing her weapons hidden beneath her evening purse. "Before my husband speaks," she announced, her voice carrying easily, "across the assembled crowd, I'd like to say a few words about how delighted we are to welcome Liliana and her family into our lives." John's smile was surprised, but pleased. His mother's public blessing would mean everything to Liliana. Even Liliana looked hopeful, interpreting this as the olive branch she'd been desperately wanting. What neither of them expected was for Athena to reveal the secrets that would destroy their fairy tale in front of 300 witnesses who would ensure the devastation became Manhattan legend by morning. The folder opened like Pandora's box, and once its contents spilled into the perfect evening air, there would be no putting them back inside. Chapter 7. Wedding Storm Approaches. Sometimes the most beautiful days carry the seeds of their own destruction, and the morning that should have marked the final countdown to John and Liliana's perfect wedding dawned with the kind of crystalline beauty that made even veteran New Yorkers pause to appreciate spring's gift to the city. 8 months had passed since the charity gala that changed everything. 2 months since their engagement became public knowledge. And 4 weeks remained until their wedding day. 4 weeks that should have been filled with final fittings and flower arrangements, last-minute guest confirmations, and the happy chaos that preceded every society celebration worth attending. Instead, the Legend estate buzzed with the kind of tension that preceded major battles, as if everyone involved sensed that something significant was building toward an inevitable collision. Liliana sat in the morning room with wedding folders spread around her like battle plans, each decision requiring diplomatic negotiations that made international peace treaties look simple by comparison. The ivory invitations with silver accents lay before her, Athena's choice. Naturally, along with menu cards for a reception that felt more like a state dinner than a celebration of love. 500 guests, she murmured to Isabella, who'd arrived for their final planning session armed with coffee and the kind of protective loyalty that had gotten them through every crisis since college. 500 people I've never met, all of whom will be analyzing every detail to determine whether I'm worthy of the legend name. Isabella studied her best. Friend's face with the careful attention of someone who'd been reading Liliana's moods for a decade. The confident woman who'd told off Victoria Blackwood and survived Athena's dinner party ambushes had been slowly eroding over the past months, worn down by constant compromise and the growing realization that her wedding was becoming everyone else's event. You could still elope, Isabella pointed out, not for the first time. Vegas chapel, Elvis impersonator, married by midnight with nobody's approval required except your own. John's father would never forgive us, Liliana replied, though the idea was increasingly tempting. He's been writing his father of the groom speech for weeks, and you know how excited he gets about family celebrations. The truth was more complicated than wedding planning logistics. Over the past 6 months, Liliana had watched herself disappear piece by piece, her preferences overruled and her instincts questioned until she barely recognized the woman staring back from bridal magazines. Every choice became a referendum on her suitability, every preference evidence of her need for guidance in navigating the complexities of her new position. What does John say about all this? Isabella asked, gesturing at the folders filled with decisions that reflected Athena's vision rather than the bride's dreams. He says it doesn't matter what the wedding looks like, as long as I'm the one walking down the aisle. Liliana's smile was tired but genuine. He's been incredible through all of this, defending every choice, supporting every preference, making it clear that his loyalty is to me rather than his mother's expectations. But he doesn't see what it's costing me to keep fighting these battles. Every vendor meeting becomes an exercise in diplomatic immunity. Every family dinner feels like a performance review. I'm exhausted from trying to prove I deserve the name I'm about to take. Before Isabella could respond, voices in the foyer announced new arrivals, and moments later, John appeared in the doorway with Thomas behind him. Both men carrying the kind of grim expressions that suggested they'd come bearing unwelcome news. "We need to talk," John said without preamble, his usual warm greeting replaced by something that sounded almost formal. "All of us. About what's been happening behind the scenes." The four of them settled into the morning room's comfortable chairs while John ran his hands through his hair with the nervous energy that appeared whenever family drama threatened their relationship. "My mother has been busy," he began, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Thomas discovered some things about her recent activities that you need to know about. Thomas leaned forward, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by protective seriousness. She's been making calls to vendors, suggesting modifications to your choices. The florist thinks you changed your mind about the arrangements 3 times. The photographer has been told to prepare for more traditional poses than what you originally discussed. She's also been having conversations with guests, John continued, his jaw tightening with each revelation, preparing them for what she calls an adjustment period, while you learn to navigate your new social responsibilities. Liliana felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized the full extent of Athena's behind-the-scenes maneuvering. It wasn't enough to override her preferences. During planning meetings, she was actively working to ensure that the wedding itself would serve as public demonstration of Liliana's need for guidance and correction. There's more, Thomas said reluctantly. Helena Blackwood has been conducting her own investigation into your family background. Professional-level research that goes back decades. We don't know what she's found, but whatever it is, she's been sharing it with your mother. John's face had gone white with rage that made the air in the room feel dangerous. They're planning something for the wedding itself. Some kind of public revelation or confrontation designed to... I don't know what they're hoping to achieve. They want me to run, Liliana said quietly, the truth crystallizing with sudden clarity. Not before the wedding. That would make John look like the victim and generate sympathy for our relationship. They want me to run during the wedding, in front of everyone who matters in your world. So you look like someone who made an understandable mistake with an unsuitable woman who ultimately proved she wasn't worth fighting for. The silence that followed was loaded with implications nobody wanted to voice. Isabella was vibrating with protective fury. Thomas looked like he wanted to hit something, and John appeared to be calculating various forms of justifiable homicide. We cancel it, John said finally, his voice absolute in its determination. We cancel the whole production and get married at City Hall tomorrow, with just our immediate families present. Problem solved. We can't cancel, Liliana replied, though part of her desperately wanted to accept his offer. 500 invitations have been sent, vendors have been paid, your business associates are expecting to attend. Canceling now would create the kind of social scandal that would follow you for years. I don't give a damn about social scandal. But I do, she interrupted, surprising them all with the firmness in her voice. Not because I care what these people think of me, but because I care what they think of you. You didn't choose to be born into this world, but you have to live in it. Your reputation affects your business, your friendships, your entire future. I won't let your mother manipulate us into making choices that damage your life. Isabella was studying Liliana with growing admiration and concern. So what's the plan? We go through with the wedding, knowing they're planning some kind of ambush? We go through with the wedding, Liliana confirmed, and we handle whatever they throw at us with dignity and grace. If they want to make our love story into a public spectacle, then we make sure it's a spectacle that reflects the truth about who we are and what we mean to each other. John reached across the space between their chairs to capture her hands, his touch warm and steadying despite the storm brewing around them. Lily, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're already more than worthy of this family. They're the ones who need to prove they deserve you. I know that, she said softly, but knowing it and showing it are different things. Your mother has spent months trying to make me doubt myself, trying to convince everyone that I'm not strong enough for this world. It's time to prove her wrong in a way that can't be misinterpreted or dismissed. 3 weeks later, as final preparations reached fever pitch and the society columnists began their pre-wedding speculation about whether the Brooklyn school teacher would successfully navigate her transformation into Manhattan royalty, nobody could have predicted that the most devastating attack would come not from enemies, but from secrets that had been hidden for nearly 30 years. Athena legend was preparing her final weapon, and this time she intended to make sure there would be no recovery, no comeback, no fairy tale ending to inspire other unsuitable women to reach above their stations. The war for John's future was about to reach its climax, and only one side would survive the devastation that was coming. Chapter 8. Before the Storm. Some battles are won in boardrooms with handshakes and contracts, others on literal battlefields with courage and strategy. But the most decisive victories happen in quiet moments when people choose who they want to be, when everything they value is at stake. The night before their wedding, 9 months after that first magical encounter at the charity gala, John and Liliana sat on the terrace of his penthouse overlooking Central Park, sharing champagne and trying to pretend that tomorrow would be a celebration rather than the culmination of months of psychological warfare disguised as wedding planning. Manhattan sparkled below them like a constellation that had fallen to earth, and in the distance, the Legend estate glowed with lights from vendors, making final preparations for what society columnists were already calling the wedding of the decade. 500 guests would arrive tomorrow to witness either a fairy tale come true or a spectacular social collision, depending on their perspective and their relationship with the bride's future mother-in-law. "Last chance to run away to Vegas," John said, refilling their glasses with champagne that tasted like liquid starlight but couldn't quite wash away the anxiety that had been building for days. Elvis impersonator, neon chapel, married by midnight with no family drama required. Liliana curled closer to his side, drawing comfort from his warmth and the steady rhythm of his breathing. The past week had been a blur of final fittings and flower arrangements, rehearsal dinner preparations, and the kind of diplomatic negotiations that made international peace treaties look simple. "Your father would never forgive us," she replied, though the fantasy was increasingly appealing. "He's been practicing his speech for weeks, and you know how excited he gets about family celebrations." "My father would forgive us anything as long as we're happy," John corrected, his arm tightening around her waist. "It's my mother's forgiveness we'd never earn, and honestly, I'm not sure I care about that anymore." The admission hung between them like a bridge they hadn't expected to cross. John's relationship with Athena had deteriorated steadily over the past months, each wedding planning session creating new fractures in a bond that had once seemed unbreakable. At 32, he was finally seeing his mother clearly for the first time, and what he discovered wasn't particularly admirable. "She loves you," Liliana said softly, because even after 9 months of conflict, she couldn't bring herself to hate the woman who'd raised the man she adored. "She's just terrified of losing you to someone she doesn't understand." "Love doesn't excuse cruelty," John replied, his voice carrying the weight of 6 months' worth of disappointments and betrayals. "And what she's been doing to you, to us, isn't protective love. It's controlling fear dressed up as maternal concern." They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the day ahead. The ceremony itself would be beautiful. Even Athena's interference couldn't completely destroy the magic of two people promising to love each other forever in front of everyone who mattered to them. But the reception afterward felt like walking into a minefield, especially given the intelligence Thomas had gathered about Helena Blackwood's investigation and Athena's mysterious folder of important information. "Whatever she's planning," Liliana said suddenly, as if she could read his thoughts, "we'll handle it together. Whatever secrets she's uncovered or ammunition she's gathered, we face it as partners." John turned to study her face in the soft light from the apartment, seeing the woman who'd transformed his black and white world into technicolor, who'd taught him that love was worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. "I should have protected you better," he said, guilt evident in every word. "I should have shut down her attacks months ago. Should have made it clear that hurting you meant losing me permanently. You did protect me, Liliana corrected, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. Every dinner where you defended my choices, every meeting where you supported my preferences, every moment when you made it clear that your loyalty was to me rather than her expectations. You've been my shield and my strength through all of this. Then why do I feel like I failed you? Because you love us both, and that puts you in an impossible position. Her voice was soft with understanding rather than accusation. You want your mother's approval of the woman you've chosen, and you want me to feel welcomed by your family. Those are beautiful desires, John, but they require cooperation from people who aren't willing to give it. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message that made his expression darken with familiar frustration. Thomas, apparently my mother wants to see me first thing tomorrow morning before the ceremony. She has something important to discuss about our future. The ammunition Helena found, Liliana said with resignation rather than fear. Whatever dirt they've dug up about my family, tomorrow's the day they plan to use it. John's jaw tightened with protective fury that made him look dangerous in the soft apartment lighting. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. There's nothing in your past or your family's past that could possibly change how I feel about you. You say that now, but you don't know what they've found. What if it's something genuinely awful? What if my mother has secrets that would horrify you if you knew the truth? Then we deal with it together, John said fiercely, capturing her hands in his and holding them against his chest so she could feel his heartbeat. Lily, listen to me carefully. I don't care if your mother was a convicted felon or a former prostitute or committed tax fraud 20 years ago. I don't care if your father was a drug dealer or your grandmother was a con artist or your entire family tree is filled with criminals and misfits. His voice grew stronger with each word, absolute certainty replacing anxiety and doubt. I fell in love with you, not your family history, not your social status, not your bank account balance. You, the woman who cries during commercials about rescued animals and makes grocery shopping, feel like an adventure, and teaches sick children that creativity can heal broken hearts. That woman is who I'm marrying tomorrow, and no amount of ancient family secrets can change that fact. They made love that night with desperate tenderness, both understanding that this was their last night as unmarried individuals, their final evening before crossing a bridge that would make them partners in everything that followed. John whispered promises against her skin while she memorized the feeling of being completely loved. And when they finally fell asleep tangled together, both were more determined than ever to face whatever battles lay ahead. Morning came with the kind of golden sunshine that seemed specially ordered for important occasions, and by 8 o'clock, the Legend estate was buzzing with vendors, making final preparations for the ceremony that would begin at 4. Florists arranged displays that looked like something from a museum. Caterers prepared food that would make international chefs weep with envy, and an orchestra that had played for European royalty rehearsed music that would provide the soundtrack for Manhattan's social event of the year. John arrived at the estate to find his mother waiting in her private study, dressed in elegant navy that complemented her silver hair and made her look every inch the society matriarch she'd been training to become since birth. The manila folder on her desk seemed to pulse with malevolent promise. "John, darling," she said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded major storms. "Thank you for coming. We need to discuss some things before you make the biggest decision of your life." "I already made that decision," John replied, remaining standing despite her gesture toward the chair across from her desk. "6 months ago when I proposed to the woman I love. Today we're just making it official in front of our friends and family." "That's exactly what I want to talk about," Athena said, opening the folder with theatrical precision. "Because I don't think you have all the information you need to make an informed choice about the woman you're binding your life to." The photographs that spilled across her desk made John's vision blur with rage so complete and overwhelming that for a moment he couldn't speak or move or even breathe normally. What Athena had discovered about Paisley Jades past would either destroy his relationship forever or provide the ultimate test of whether love really could survive any revelation. The war for his future was about to begin in earnest, and by sunset, either his heart would be broken or his mother would have lost her son forever. Chapter 9. The Strike and the Phoenix. Some moments split your life into before and after, and as Liliana Jade Legend stood at the altar of the Legend Estate's garden chapel, watching her groom walk toward her, with tears streaming down his face and love blazing in his eyes like captured starlight, she had no idea that in exactly 3 hours, her new mother-in-law would attempt to destroy her happiness in front of 500 witnesses who would turn the devastation into Manhattan legend. The ceremony was everything they'd dreamed, despite months of family warfare disguised as wedding planning. October sunshine painted the garden in gold and amber, while white roses created an aisle that looked like a path through heaven itself. When John saw Liliana walking toward him in flowing silk and antique lace, his composure shattered completely, and David had to steady him as overwhelming emotion threatened to buckle his knees. "Dearly beloved," Father Martinez began, his voice carrying easily across the crowd of Manhattan's most elite, "we are gathered in this beautiful garden to witness the marriage of John and Liliana, two souls who found each other across every obstacle that should have kept them apart. Their vows were spoken with voices that shook with emotion, promises exchanged between trembling hands that had learned to reach for each other in every storm. When John slipped his grandmother's emerald ring onto Liliana's finger, and she placed his grandfather's gold band on his hand, the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. This wasn't just a union of two people, but the joining of two worlds that had never successfully merged before. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York," Father Martinez announced with obvious joy, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. John, you may kiss your bride." Their kiss lasted long enough to make photographers worry about their shots, and even skeptical relatives smile despite their reservations. When they finally broke apart, both glowing with happiness that seemed to light the entire garden, the applause was thunderous and genuine. "Ladies and gentlemen," the minister said with a grin, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. John Legend." The reception that followed was everything Athena had orchestrated. Elegant beyond description, flawlessly executed, attended by everyone who mattered in New York society. The ballroom sparkled with crystal and gold, while an orchestra that had played for royalty provided soundtrack for what was already being whispered about as the wedding of the decade. Liliana moved through the celebration with growing confidence, the morning's terror replaced by joy that made her practically incandescent in her wedding gown. She'd survived the ceremony, gracefully accepted congratulations from 500 strangers, and was beginning to believe that perhaps their fairy tale really could have a happy ending, despite every obstacle that had been placed in their path. John hadn't left her side all evening, his hand constantly finding hers, his eyes never straying far from her face, as if he couldn't quite believe she was now his wife. When they danced, other couples cleared the floor to watch. When they laughed at shared jokes, even cynical observers found themselves believing in love again. But Athena Legend had been watching, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to deploy the weapons she'd been gathering for months. As dessert was being served and guests relaxed into champagne-induced contentment, she rose from the head table with the graceful authority that came from 3 decades of commanding Manhattan's most exclusive ballrooms. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying easily across the crowded space as conversations died with mathematical precision, "before this magical evening ends, I'd like to share a few words about the remarkable couple we're celebrating tonight." John's smile was surprised but pleased, his mother's blessing, delivered publicly to their most important social contacts. would mean everything to Liliana and go a long way toward healing the wounds that had been festering since their engagement. When my son first told me about Liliana, Athena continued, her voice warm with apparent maternal affection, I'll admit I was concerned. Not because there was anything wrong with her, quite the opposite. She was so perfect, so accomplished and beautiful, that I worried she might be too good to be true. The crowd listened with polite attention, expecting the usual platitudes about love and family and new beginnings. John squeezed Liliana's hand encouragingly, both of them relaxing as Athena's tone remained warm and accepting. So I did what any protective mother would do, Athena said. Reaching into her purse with casual precision, I tried to learn everything I could about the woman who'd captured my son's heart. Her education, her work, her family background, her dreams and aspirations. The manila folder she withdrew seemed innocuous enough. Just another prop in what appeared to be a heartfelt mother-of-the-groom speech. But Paisley's face had gone very still in the way it did when she sensed approaching danger. 30 years of protective instincts screaming warnings she couldn't yet identify. What I discovered, Athena continued, opening the folder with theatrical precision, was truly remarkable. I learned about a young woman who'd overcome tremendous obstacles to build a meaningful career. I learned about a mother who'd sacrificed everything for her daughter's future. I learned about a family that understood the true value of hard work and dedication. Her voice took on a note of what sounded like admiration, though something cold flickered behind her eyes. Which is why I want to share with all of you the complete picture of the extraordinary woman my son has chosen to spend his life with. Because I believe that honesty is the foundation of any strong marriage. And our friends and family deserve to know the full truth about what we're celebrating tonight. The atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted subtly, conversations stopping as people sensed that something significant was about to happen. Social predators had excellent instincts for blood in the water, and the suddenly focused attention of 500 guests created tension that was almost physical. The truth, Athena said. Photographs spilling from the folder across the head table like evidence in a murder trial, about Liliana's extraordinary journey from childhood poverty in Brooklyn to becoming one of New York's most dedicated educators, about the sacrifices her mother made, working 3 jobs, accepting government assistance, living in subsidized housing, all to ensure her daughter could have opportunities she never did. Liliana felt the blood drain from her face as she realized this wasn't the blessing it had appeared to be. Athena was systematically exposing every private struggle, every vulnerable moment, every detail of their family's most difficult years, all disguised as admiration for their perseverance. But most importantly, Athena continued, her voice building toward whatever climax she'd been orchestrating, I want to share the complete truth about the choices that shaped this remarkable family. Because some sacrifices go far beyond simply working multiple jobs or accepting help from social services. She lifted one particular photograph higher, and Liliana's heart stopped beating as she recognized an image she'd never seen before. Her mother at 19, leaving a building that would have been familiar if she'd ever been allowed to know it existed. Ladies and gentlemen, Athena said with a smile that was pure malice disguised as maternal pride, I give you the complete truth about our new daughter-in-law's origins, a woman whose mother's greatest sacrifice wasn't just poverty or hard work, but the choices no mother should ever have to make to ensure her child's survival. The silence in the ballroom was deafening as 500 people held their breath, sensing that they were about to witness either a devastating revelation or a spectacular miscalculation. But before Athena could continue, before she could reveal whatever secrets she'd uncovered about Paisley's past, something extraordinary happened. Liliana Jade Legend stood up, not with shame or fear or the crushing humiliation Athena had orchestrated, but with the kind of regal dignity that couldn't be purchased with old money or inherited through bloodlines. She rose from her chair like a queen claiming her throne, her wedding dress catching light like armor made of starlight, her grandmother's pearls gleaming at her throat like badges of honor earned through generations of quiet strength. "Mrs. Legend," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom with quiet authority that silenced 500 people, "you're absolutely right. My mother did make sacrifices that went far beyond working multiple jobs or accepting government assistance. She made choices that required more courage than anyone in this room has probably ever needed." She looked directly at Athena as she continued, her gaze steady and unflinching. "What you've discovered about our family's past doesn't embarrass me. It makes me proud. Proud of a mother who did whatever was necessary to give her daughter a better life. Proud of a woman who chose hope over despair, action over victimhood, love over bitterness, even when the world gave her every reason to give up." Her voice grew stronger with each word, the terror of the morning replaced by fierce pride that made her absolutely radiant. "You want to know the truth about my family? The truth is that we've never taken anything we didn't earn, never hurt anyone for our own advancement, never made others feel small to make ourselves feel big. We've survived through love and determination and the unshakable belief that kindness matters more than bank account balances." She turned to address the crowd directly, her chin lifted with the kind of confidence that couldn't be destroyed by attempts at public humiliation. "Yes, we come from humble beginnings. Yes, my mother made difficult choices to ensure my future. Yes, we've worked harder than some people here can probably imagine. But I'm not ashamed of any of that, because those experiences taught me that real worth isn't measured by stock portfolios or family pedigrees. It's measured by how you treat people who can't help you advance your career, and whether you choose compassion over cruelty when you think nobody important is watching." John stood beside her, his face blazing with pride and fury and something so fierce that several guests involuntarily stepped backward. "That's my wife," he said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom with absolute finality. "That's the woman I chose, who chose me back, who makes me want to be worthy of the strength and grace she shows every single day. If anyone in this room has a problem with that, they can leave now." The applause that erupted was genuine and enthusiastic, not the polite social clapping that had followed Athena's speech, but real appreciation from guests who recognized authentic dignity when they saw it. Even people who'd been prepared to judge found themselves moved by her response to what should have been a devastating attack. David Legend was the first to rise from his seat, applauding with visible emotion as he looked at his daughter-in-law with newfound respect and admiration. Thomas followed immediately, then Isabella, then others throughout the crowd, until the entire ballroom was on its feet celebrating not just a wedding, but a woman who'd transformed attempted destruction into triumph. But as the ovation continued and guests lined up to congratulate the bride on her grace under fire, something unexpected happened. Paisley Jade approached the head table where her daughter stood surrounded by well-wishers, tears streaming down her face, not tears of humiliation, but tears of pride for a daughter who'd found the strength to turn shame into victory. And behind her, moving slowly but with obvious resolve, came Athena Legend herself, her face pale with what looked suspiciously like remorse as she approached. The woman she'd just tried to destroy, in front of Manhattan's most influential people. What happened next would determine whether this story ended with forgiveness or with a family permanently fractured by ambition and fear and the kind of cruelty that sometimes masquerades as protective love. Chapter 10, Love's True Wedding. Perfect moments don't arrive with fanfare and orchestras. They slip in quietly when people choose grace over revenge. And if you're lucky enough to recognize one, you discover that forgiveness can reshape entire worlds with nothing more than 3 small words and the courage to mean them. The silence in the ballroom stretched like eternity as Athena Legend approached the woman she'd just tried to destroy, her face pale with something that looked like genuine remorse. 500 guests held their breath, sensing they were about to witness either the most spectacular apology in Manhattan social history or the final explosion that would shatter the legend family forever. "Liliana," Athena said quietly, her voice lacking the commanding authority that usually characterized her public pronouncements. "I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. What I just did was unforgivable, and I have no excuse except fear that made me into someone I don't recognize." The admission rippled through the crowd like shockwaves. Nobody had ever heard Athena legend apologize for anything, let alone publicly acknowledge behavior that fell so far short of the standards she demanded from everyone else. "You tried to destroy me in front of everyone who matters in your son's world," Liliana replied, her voice steady, despite the emotional earthquake that had just rearranged her entire wedding reception. "You researched my family's most private struggles and weaponized them as entertainment for 500 strangers. Why?" Because I was terrified of losing my son to someone I didn't understand," Athena said, tears streaming down her face with no regard for her perfect makeup or her carefully maintained public image. "Because I spent 30 years planning John's future, and you represented everything I'd never prepared for. Because I let fear turn me into the kind of person who would hurt someone innocent to maintain control over something I was never supposed to control in the first place." John stood behind his wife, his protective fury gradually giving way to something more complex as he watched his mother's careful composure crumble completely. This wasn't the calculated manipulation he'd expected. This was genuine breakdown, the kind that comes when someone finally sees themselves clearly and doesn't like what they find. "I was wrong," Athena continued, her voice carrying the weight of 55 years of mistakes finally acknowledged, addressing not just Liliana, but the entire ballroom full of witnesses who would spread this story through Manhattan society within hours. "Wrong about you, wrong about what my son needs, wrong about what love actually looks like when it's real and tested and proven stronger than every obstacle placed in its path." She turned to face Paisley, who'd been standing quietly beside her daughter with the kind of dignity that came from surviving much worse than public humiliation. "And I was wrong about you, Paisley. The choices you made, the sacrifices you endured, they weren't shameful secrets to be exposed. They were evidence of the kind of character that should be celebrated, not attacked. Your daughter is extraordinary because of who you are and what you taught her about strength and love and refusing to give up when life becomes impossible." The ballroom remained silent. 500 people processing the unprecedented spectacle of Manhattan's most formidable society matriarch publicly dismantling her own behavior with surgical precision. "Ye don't know how to repair the damage I've done," Athena said finally, her voice breaking on the words, "or whether you can ever forgive someone who tried to destroy your happiness on what should have been the most perfect day of your life. But I want to try. I want to learn how to be the kind of mother-in-law who supports her son's joy instead of threatening it." Liliana looked at this woman who'd spent months making her life miserable, who'd just attempted the most sophisticated character assassination in recent memory, who stood before her now, completely stripped of pride and power and demanding nothing in return for her apology. She thought about the investigation files and the hostile dinner parties, about Victoria Blackwood's cutting remarks and the constant pressure to prove she was worthy of the legend name. She thought about 6 months of psychological warfare disguised as wedding planning, about preferences overruled and instincts questioned until she'd nearly lost herself completely. Then she thought about love, not just her love for John, but love as a choice that could transform even the most damaged relationships into something worth preserving. "I forgive you," Liliana said quietly, and the 3 words carried across the silent ballroom like benediction. "Not because what you did was acceptable, but because holding on to anger would poison the happiness John and I fought so hard to build. The relief that flooded Athena's face was so complete it made her stagger slightly. John moved to steady his mother, seeing her clearly for the first time in months, not as the enemy who'd tried to destroy his marriage, but as a woman whose love had been distorted by fear into something unrecognizable. "Thank you," Athena whispered, then louder so the entire room could hear. "Thank you for showing more grace than I deserved and more wisdom than I possessed. You are exactly the daughter-in-law this family needs, and I'm proud to welcome you home." What happened next would be talked about in Manhattan social circles for years. David Legend approaching his wife with gentle compassion, helping her to a chair while she composed herself. Paisley offering tissues and quiet words of comfort to the woman who just tried to humiliate her. John and Liliana sharing a look of understanding that their fairy tale wasn't ending with the wedding. It was evolving into something deeper and more complex and infinitely more real. But the moment that transformed everything came when David rose from his seat, champagne glass in hand, and addressed the crowd with the emotional intelligence that had made him beloved by everyone who knew him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily across the still silent ballroom, "we've all witnessed something remarkable tonight. Not just the marriage of two extraordinary people, but a demonstration of what love actually looks like when it's tested by the worst impulses of human nature and chooses forgiveness anyway." He raised his glass toward John and Liliana, who stood together like survivors of a storm that had somehow made them stronger. "To John and Liliana Legend," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "who've proven that love really can conquer anything, including the fear that makes people hurt each other in desperate attempts to protect what they think they might lose. May your marriage be blessed with the kind of grace you've shown tonight, and may the rest of us learn from your example." The toast that followed was unlike any in Manhattan social history. 500 people celebrating not just a wedding, but forgiveness powerful enough to heal relationships that seemed irreparably broken. 3 months later, when Athena personally planned and hosted the baby shower for Liliana's first pregnancy, when she held her grandson for the first time with tears of joy instead of disappointment, when she stood beside Paisley at the baptism introducing her as my dear friend and fellow grandmother, everyone who witnessed those moments understood that some stories don't end with the wedding, they begin with it. The greatest love story ever told wasn't about perfect people finding each other in a perfect world. It was about imperfect people choosing to love each other perfectly, fighting for that love when it was threatened, forgiving when forgiveness seemed impossible, and building a family that proved grace really could transform even the coldest hearts into something worthy of the love they'd been given. John and Liliana Legend didn't just live happily ever after. They created happiness that lasted, love that multiplied, and forgiveness that taught everyone around them the difference between having everything and having what really matters. In the end, that might be the most perfect ending of all.